else.
Imagine walking into work one morning. Your work, the systems you built, the infrastructure you designed, the company you kept alive for nearly 2 decades, and a man half your experience, wearing a suit that costs more than your monthly salary, looks you dead in the eye and says, "I'm not spending a penny on a useless employee." Now imagine that man had absolutely no idea what he'd just done. This is the story of Lisa Carter, the woman who built the machine, and the day she decided to turn it off. If you have ever poured everything, your time, your talent, your soul, into a job, only to be dismissed like you are nothing, this story is going to hit you somewhere deep. And if you've ever fantasized about the moment karma finally shows up and does its job, oh, you are going to love what happens next. Hit that like button, subscribe if you're new, and drop a comment telling me, have you ever been underestimated at work? Because you are not alone. Now, let's get into it. I still remember every detail of that morning with unsettling clarity. The office looked exactly the same as it always had. The familiar hum of computers warming up. The faint, almost comforting smell of printer paper and recycled air. The morning sun cutting through the blinds in long golden strips, falling across my desk like it had every single day for the past 17 years. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. Because standing at the front of the room, in the spot where Richard Hamilton used to stand with his worn leather portfolio and his warm, measured smile, was someone else entirely. His son, Jason Hamilton. He stood there like he owned the place, which I suppose technically he now did. Tailored charcoal suit, hair slicked back with the kind of precision that takes more time than most people spend on their morning commute. Jaw set, shoulders back, chin tilted just slightly upward, the posture of a man who has never once questioned whether he belonged in a room. He clapped his hands together. Once. Twice. Good morning, everyone. The energy was off. Too bright. Too performative. Like a motivational speaker who had shown up to the wrong event. From this moment on, I am your new CEO. A beat of silence. Then, hesitant, scattered, uncertain applause. The kind of applause that people give when they're not sure whether they're supposed to be celebrating or concerned. I didn't clap. Not out of defiance. Not yet. But because I had worked alongside this man's father long enough to recognize the difference between someone who had earned a room and someone who had simply inherited one. And the person standing before us, surveying his new kingdom with barely concealed hunger? He had not earned this room. He had been handed the keys. And he didn't even know what all the locks were for. Let me tell you about Richard Hamilton, the man who actually built Hamilton Tech Solutions, because understanding him is essential to understanding everything that follows. Richard was old school in the best possible way. Conservative, yes. Sometimes frustratingly slow to embrace change. But fair, genuinely, consistently, bone-deep fair. He wasn't a technical genius. He couldn't write a line of code to save his life, and he knew it. But what Richard understood, with a kind of clarity that only comes from decades of experience, was people. He understood that the most valuable thing a company possesses isn't its product, its contracts, or its client list. It's the people who keep the lights on. He understood loyalty. He cultivated it. And he honored it. I had been at Hamilton Tech for 17 years. I joined before Richard even purchased the building, back when it was a scrappy little operation running on borrowed servers and sheer determination. I had helped build the infrastructure from the ground up. I had written the foundational code that the entire company ran on. I had designed the internal systems, the payroll architecture, the security protocols, the client database integrations, the CRM, the internal communication platforms. All of it. And for the last 3 years, I had served as chief systems architect, the person whose name was quietly attached to everything that worked and everything that didn't. I wasn't just an employee. I was the foundation. But to Jason Hamilton, standing at the front of that room with his polished shoes and his borrowed authority, I was just another aging face in a crowd of people he planned to streamline. He began walking through the office. Slowly, deliberately. Like a new landlord inspecting a property, pausing here and there, glancing at screens, tilting his head as if performing some kind of assessment. People straightened in their chairs. Conversations went quiet. The atmosphere that had once felt like a workplace suddenly felt like an audition. "Changes are coming," he announced, pausing in the center of the room with a tight, practiced smile. "Efficiency, optimization, streamlining." He let those words float in the air for a moment. "Some of you may not fit into Hamilton Tech's new vision." I felt it before I saw it, the subtle shift of energy, the way a few sets of eyes slid toward me. Because they knew. They had worked alongside me long enough to understand exactly who Jason was talking about. And they knew it wasn't because I had ever made a mistake. In fact, and this detail matters, the one significant mistake I could point to was his. 3 years prior, during his brief internship at the company, a younger, cockier Jason had decided to contribute to a project by modifying a segment of back-end code. He had no idea what he was doing. I caught the error 6 hours before it would have caused a catastrophic system crash, the kind that would have taken days to fix and cost the company hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost operations. I fixed it quietly, told no one. I protected him, and sitting in that office watching him strut across the floor he hadn't earned, I thought for the first time, maybe I shouldn't have. Later that afternoon, a notification appeared in my inbox. Meeting for PM. CEO's office. Jason Hamilton. I read it twice. Set my phone face down on the desk. Took a slow breath. I already knew. The way you sometimes know a thing before it happens in your body, in the back of your throat. I had been in this industry long enough to recognize a termination meeting when I saw one. But knowing didn't make it easier. It just meant I had a few hours to prepare. I spent them going over my contract. Specifically, the clause buried on page 47 of a 63-page document. The clause that Richard Hamilton's legal team and I had drafted together quietly 3 years ago when he first offered me the chief systems architect role. I had made one condition before accepting: protection. If I was going to take full responsibility for every critical system in the company, payroll, HR portals, client databases, security infrastructure, government contract compliance, all of it, then I needed to know that my position was protected, that I couldn't be removed on a whim, without cause, without compensation, without consequence. Richard had agreed immediately. He respected it. He understood it. The clause was clear. In the event of wrongful termination, defined as dismissal without documented cause, or termination without the severance pay outlined in the contract, I retained the right to revoke system access, suspend all integrations, and strip administrative privileges across every platform I had architected. In other words, if they pushed me out without honoring the agreement, I could take the entire operating system of the company dark. Not delete, not destroy, suspend, legally, contractually, cleanly. An emergency measure designed for disaster scenarios. I suspected Jason had never read past the title page of his father's employment contracts. I was about to find out. At 4 p.m., I walked into the CEO's office, Richard's old office, still smelling faintly of his cedar aftershave, now occupied by someone who hadn't earned a single piece of the furniture. Jason didn't look up when I entered. "Sit down." I sat, folded my hands in my lap, kept my face neutral, kept my breathing steady. My heart was pounding. I won't pretend it wasn't, but my expression gave nothing away. Years of boardroom presentations and crisis management will do that for you. He sat back in the leather chair, Richard's leather chair, with a satisfied posture of someone who had been waiting to do this for a while. He looked at me the way someone looks at an old appliance they've decided to throw out. "Lisa, you've been here a long time." "Yes. Almost 2 decades," I replied calmly. He smirked. The corners of his mouth curled upward with something that wasn't quite amusement, more like contempt with a thin veneer of politeness stretched over it. 20 whole years. Doing what exactly? Still fixing old code? Babysitting the systems. I said nothing. My jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly, but I said nothing. He leaned forward. His voice dropped a register, like he wanted the words to land heavier. "I'm not spending a penny on a useless employee." 7 words. 7 words after 17 years. "Are you firing me?" I asked. My voice was quieter than I intended, almost a whisper. Not from weakness, from the sheer effort of keeping everything else contained. He blinked. He'd clearly expected something more dramatic.
Tears, maybe. Pleading.
Raised voices. Instead, he got stillness, and it confused him. "At least you have the dignity not to make a scene," he said. I stood up.
Slowly. Push my chair back.
Turned toward the door. "HR will be in touch about your severance," he added, almost as an afterthought, like he'd nearly forgotten the formality. I stopped. Hand on the door frame. Back still turned to him. "According to your father's contract," I said carefully, "severance is automatic upon termination. But I'd strongly suggest you review the terms again." I didn't wait for a response. I walked out of the office, walked down the hallway, pressed the elevator button with steady fingers, stepped inside, watched the doors close. And then, alone, I finally allowed myself to feel it. Not rage, not despair. Something quieter and more dangerous than either.
Clarity.
I drove home in silence. No music, no podcasts. Just the sound of traffic and the steady rhythm of my own breathing. I made coffee, set my laptop on the kitchen table, opened it, and I began to read my contract. The whole thing, every word, every clause, the way you read something you already know but need to see confirmed in black and white. There it was. Section 9, Subsection 4. Emergency Access Revocation Protocol. I read it 3 times. Then I opened my remote systems control panel. Hamilton Tech's entire digital infrastructure was still linked to my administrator account. Not because I had been sneaky or underhanded, but because nobody had reassigned access. No exit interview. No formal transition meeting. No IT handover protocol. No call from HR. Nothing. Jason had fired me and apparently expected me to simply evaporate. As if 17 years of my life could be erased with a wave of his hand and a single insulting sentence. He had fired me without cause. He had fired me without severance. And he had done it with a smirk. Every condition of the clause had been met. I barely slept that night. Not from grief or anger, but from something I can only describe as focused energy. The kind you feel when you know, with absolute precision, what your next move is. By morning, I had made my decision. I woke up, showered, made another coffee, sat down at the desk, opened the control panel. The cursor hovered over the emergency lock tab. I thought about those 7 words one more time. I'm not spending a penny on a useless employee. And I clicked. What happened next took approximately 43 seconds. The employee portal locked, cutting off payroll access. The internal messaging system went dark. The CRM, the customer relationship management system that every sales and support representative used to manage client accounts, respond to tickets, and process orders, went offline. The project management platform suspended. The accounting software disconnected. The compliance documentation system, critical for their government contracts, became inaccessible. The servers themselves remained on. I wasn't deleting anything. That would have been illegal, and I knew it. What I was doing was suspending access, exactly as the contract permitted, exactly as the clause specified, in precisely the scenario it was written for. The lifelines of Hamilton Tech Solutions went dark, one by one, like lights being turned off in an empty building. I watched it happen from my kitchen table in my bathrobe, with a cup of coffee going cold beside me. And then I waited. By noon, my phone began to vibrate. Unknown number. Then again. Then a text from Mark, a senior IT analyst I'd worked alongside for years. "System is crashing. Did you do something?" I didn't respond. The receptionist called. I missed it. Then Jason. I stared at his name on the screen for a long moment. Then I picked up, kept my voice completely even. "Lisa speaking. What have you done to our system?" His voice was unrecognizable. The smooth, smirking CEO from yesterday was gone. What remained was raw, stripped-back panic, the sound of a man realizing, for perhaps the first time in his life, that he has made a catastrophic mistake. "I acted strictly according to the contract," I said. "You should read it." I didn't delete anything. I continued before he could interrupt. "I revoked access. There's a significant legal difference between the two." "You're out of your mind." "No, Jason. I was prepared. You made a decision without understanding its consequences. That's not on me. I could hear him pacing. Footsteps across a hard floor, quick and agitated. The sound of someone who is used to being in control, discovering, perhaps for the first time, what it feels like not to be. "How do I fix this?" he demanded, his voice suddenly dropping. Quieter. "How do I get everything back?" "You don't get to make that call," I replied. "You're not authorized to make changes to these systems." "That's rather the point." A long silence. Then, barely above a whisper, "What do you want?" I had thought about this moment. I could have named a number: compensation, back pay, damages. I could have demanded a formal reinstatement. I could have lawyered up and let this drag through arbitration for 6 months. But what I wanted was simpler.
And more lasting.
"I want you to admit your mistake," I said. "Publicly. In front of your team, your board of directors, and every person who watched you walk into that company and begin dismantling something you didn't understand. You weren't ready to lead." A bitter, incredulous laugh from his end. "Are you serious?" "You have no choice," I replied quietly. And I hung up. The next 2 days were, by all accounts, spectacular. I say that not with cruelty, but with the detached satisfaction of someone watching a precisely predicted outcome unfold. Hamilton Tech was in freefall. Salaries weren't being processed. The payroll system was suspended. Customer accounts were inaccessible. The CRM was dark. Support tickets were piling up unanswered. The finance team couldn't process a single invoice. And, in a detail I will admit gave me a quiet, guilty flicker of amusement, even the office coffee machine had stopped working. It ran on the same cloud admin panel I had designed, and it was, technically speaking, part of the network I had suspended. The entire nervous system of the company had gone quiet. On the third morning, an anonymous text arrived. "Board of Directors emergency meeting. Jason is in serious trouble." I didn't need to guess who sent it.
I returned to my freelance clients.
I answered emails. I made dinner. I tried to focus on other things, but I watched. How could I not? This wasn't just about me anymore. It never fully had been. This was about every person in that building who had sensed from the moment Jason walked in that something was wrong, who had watched him dismiss experience and replace it with ego, who had stayed quiet out of self-preservation and now were caught in the collateral damage of his arrogance. Meanwhile, I heard from a contact in accounting that Jason had done what desperate people do. He had called in an outside IT firm. He had promised them triple rates to restore access within 72 hours. They failed. Because I hadn't just built those systems. I had fortified them. Not as a contingency plan against a future CEO, but because that was what Richard had asked of me, the highest level security architecture designed to protect confidential legal documents, personnel records, payroll data, government contracts. Security that, ironically, had now become the very wall Jason couldn't get through. By day 4, the board was fielding calls from suppliers threatening lawsuits. Government contracts were on the verge of cancellation due to compliance documentation being inaccessible. Key clients were threatening to walk. The Golden Boy had turned the company into a cautionary tale in less than a week. Then the board called me. "Miss Carter, this is Diane Hart.
We need to speak with you."
As soon as possible." Her voice was composed, professional, the controlled cadence of someone managing a crisis with careful precision. I recognized it because I had once been the person managing the crises that other people caused. "When?" I asked. "Within the hour, if you're available." I changed into my black blazer, fixed my hair the same way I had for every quarterly board presentation I'd ever given, and I joined the video call. 6 board members, behind their heavy redwood desks, faces arranged in varying degrees of controlled concern. And there in the center of the screen, Jason. He looked like a different person. Collar open, eyes red. The slick, self-satisfied CEO from Monday morning had been replaced by a man who looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days. Because he probably hadn't. "Lisa," Diane began carefully, "we are aware of the disruption to our systems." "Yes," I confirmed. "Your contract granted you the right to suspend access in the event of wrongful termination."
"Correct."
"One of the conditions being dismissal without severance pay." "Exactly." Jason shifted on screen. He wanted to speak. He held back. "Were you offered severance?" Diane asked. No, I said simply. Mr. Hamilton told me, and I quote, that he was not spending a penny on a useless employee. Silence descended on the call, like a physical weight. Several board members exchanged glances. One, an older man in the corner of the screen, pressed 2 fingers to his temple. Diane turned to Jason. Slowly, deliberately. Is that accurate? A long, terrible pause. I didn't read the contract completely, he finally said. I thought it was a standard template. I raised one eyebrow. It is not. Diane exhaled, just slightly. The sound of someone working very hard to remain professional. To confirm, the data is intact, but access is suspended?
Correct.
No data loss. I followed protocol exactly. What would you need to restore access? I paused for exactly 3 seconds. Official acknowledgement of wrongful termination. A formal letter revoking the dismissal. And a public apology from Mr. Hamilton to the team and to the board. Jason's face tightened. Are you serious? Extremely, I said. You fired me without cause, without severance, and without understanding the systems you were supposedly responsible for. You don't get to simply undo that. Diane nodded slowly. We will consider your terms, Miss Carter. Thank you, I said. And I ended the call. The outside IT firm failed again on day 4. The board was now dealing with supplier lawsuits, client escalations, and the very real possibility of government contract cancellations. And then, that evening, my phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in over a year. Richard Hamilton. Lisa. His voice was slower than I remembered, quieter, carrying the particular weight of a man who is choosing his words carefully. I heard what happened. Hello, Mr. Hamilton, I said, and I was surprised to find my throat tighten a little. This was the man who had trusted me, elevated me, protected me, with a contract clause that his own son hadn't bothered to read. I should have reached out sooner, he said. I've been unwell, but Diana has kept me informed. I've read everything, including our contract. A slight pause, a careful clearing of his throat. I want you to know, I intend to honor its terms. I gave you that authority because you earned it. And what's happening now only proves how necessary it was. Something in my chest loosened. Thank you, I said quietly. That means more than you know. Are you willing to meet? He asked. Just the 2 of us. No lawyers. No Jason. The next morning, we met at a small cafe on the edge of town, the kind of place with wooden tables and a chalkboard menu, and no reason for anyone from corporate to ever set foot inside. Richard looked older, smaller, somehow, in his coat and his careful movements. But his eyes were exactly as I remembered them, clear, direct, and genuinely kind. I trusted him to lead with wisdom, he said, after we had ordered. He led with his ego instead. He wrapped his hands around his teacup. You are the one I counted on to protect what we built, and you're the only one who can save it now. My jaw tightened. I looked at my coffee. I thought about the 7 words again. I'm not spending a penny on a useless employee. If I come back, I said slowly, I want it to mean something real. Not just a reinstatement. Not just a handshake and an apology. I know, he said. And he slid a document across the table. I looked at it. Read it. Read it again. It wasn't a job offer. It was a partnership agreement. Joint ownership of the systems I had built. Permanent intellectual property rights. Public recognition of my role in building the company's infrastructure. Full authority over the technology transition to new leadership. Where is Jason in all of this? I asked. Richard's voice was quiet, firm. Jason will be stepping down. He doesn't know yet, but after tomorrow's board meeting, it will be set in motion. I looked at him for a long moment. And his replacement? We're considering candidates. A slight smile. Quietly. That night, I read the partnership documents 3 times. Every clause was clear. Every term was fair. The contract was airtight, this time built by people who understood what they were signing. For the first time since walking out of that building, I felt something settle in my chest. Not peace, exactly. Not yet, but something close to it. The next morning, I joined the board meeting. Not as a fired employee, Not as a contractor negotiating terms. Not as someone asking for anything. I walked in as a partner. As the architect. As the person without whom none of this worked, and everyone in that room now understood exactly how true that was. Jason was there. He sat at the far end of the table, his posture collapsed inward, shoulders rounded, eyes fixed on the surface in front of him. The man who had swaggered into that office a week ago, surveying his employees like property, was gone. What remained was someone who looked like they were attending their own professional funeral. He didn't look up when I entered. I didn't need him to. Diane spoke first. Lisa, will you agree to restore full system access? I nodded.
Yes.
On one condition. She waited. Every member of the IT department receives fair compensation for the hours lost to this crisis. And every engineer from my former team receives a promotion and permanent employment status. A pause.
Then,
Agreed. I opened the admin panel on my laptop. Typed in the commands. My fingers were steady. My breathing was steady. Everything was steady. I pressed run. Somewhere across town, in the building I had spent 17 years in, lights flickered back on. Servers reoriented themselves. Databases reconnected. Inboxes filled. The payroll system resumed. The customer accounts came back online. The CRM woke up. The support tickets became answerable again. The machine breathed. I glanced at Jason once. He was staring at the table. He didn't meet my eyes. I didn't need him to. The system was back online. Emails flowing. Salaries paid. Customers returning. On the surface, it looked like the storm had passed, like everything was fine. Everything was resolved. Everything was back to normal. But inside me, something else was happening. A quiet unraveling. Not grief, exactly. Not anger. Something more complex than either of those. The kind of feeling that arrives after the adrenaline fades and the clarity of crisis dissolves, leaving you alone with the full weight of what has happened. 17 years. 17 years of early mornings and late nights. Of lunches eaten at my desk because I was mid-crisis. Of problems solved before anyone else even knew there was a problem. Of code written, systems secured, junior engineers mentored, disasters quietly averted. Of putting the company first, over and over again because I believed in it, and because I had trusted that it believed in me. And in 60 seconds, all of that had nearly been erased. I'm not spending a penny on a useless employee. 7 words. That's all it took to reduce 17 years to nothing. To look at a person who had literally kept the lights on and decide they weren't worth the cost of a proper goodbye. The pain was quiet, but it was real. And I let myself feel it. I didn't push it down or intellectualize it away. I sat with it because it deserved to be sat with. But I also knew something else. It hadn't worked. He had tried to erase me, and instead, he had proven, beyond any possible doubt, exactly how essential I was. The following week, I helped onboard the new IT leadership team. I documented every system, every protocol, every vulnerability. I refused to be the single point of failure that I had inadvertently allowed myself to become. I trained my replacements with the same care and patience I had brought to every junior engineer over the years. One afternoon, I ended up alone in the server room. The hum of the machines. The cool, conditioned air. The soft blinking of indicator lights in the dark. I had spent so much of my life in rooms like this one. And I had loved it. The quiet competence of it, the way complex systems could be understood, managed, kept healthy. There was a kind of peace in it that I had never fully explained to anyone who didn't already know. But I wasn't there to fix anything now. I was there to say goodbye. Mark found me there. He leaned against the door frame, reading my face with the easy familiarity of someone who had worked beside me for years. I heard Jason left this morning, he said. Yes, I nodded. It's about time. He didn't even say a word to anyone. Just left. I don't need his words, I replied. He was silent when it mattered. Mark was quiet for a moment. Then, Lisa, we all watched what you did. We weren't just impressed. He paused. We were proud of you. I looked up, caught off guard. Proud. You stood up for all of us. For every person who was underappreciated. For every woman who was told she wasn't capable, wasn't technical enough, wasn't leadership material. His voice was quiet and sincere. You reminded everyone in this building that a title doesn't equal intelligence. You gave us our faith back. I couldn't speak. I just smiled, small, real, a little broken around the edges. Sometimes the words that reach you deepest aren't the ones you expected. That weekend, I drove to the cemetery. My parents were buried side by side beneath a simple gray stone. Both teachers. Both people who had believed, deeply and without reservation, that integrity was the only currency that really mattered. When I had gotten the job at Hamilton Tech all those years ago, they had reacted like I'd won something precious. When I stayed late, my mother brought food. When I was passed over for promotions twice before Richard finally saw what he had, my father would say, "Keep building. The right people will notice." I sat between the headstones and pressed my hands into the cool grass. "I did it," I whispered. "Not just for me. For everyone who was told they weren't good enough. For every invisible person doing the real work while someone else took the credit." The wind moved through the trees. A long, slow exhale. I stayed until the light changed. 2 months later, the dust had settled. Hamilton Tech was running. Smoothly, quietly, with new leadership and a team that finally felt seen. The chaos was over. But Jason Hamilton had simply disappeared. Not dramatically. Not with any kind of final statement or public reckoning. He just stopped appearing. Investors quietly withdrew. Clients asked questions that nobody with his last name could answer anymore. The board members who had once nodded along with his pronouncements now spoke about him in the past tense. The golden boy had vanished. No new ventures. No LinkedIn posts about exciting next chapters. No keynote invitations. No startup launches. Just a deafening, undeniable silence, the particular quiet that follows the fall of someone who believed their position was permanent. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I didn't share articles or send knowing messages to anyone. Because I didn't need to. People like Jason don't need you to destroy them. They do it themselves, with sufficient time and sufficient latitude. They mistake inheritance for competence. They mistake fear for respect. They dismiss the people who actually keep things running, and then when those people are gone, they discover the truth. The machine doesn't run itself. Then, one afternoon, a message appeared in my inbox.
Hey.
It's been a while. Can I call? Jason.
I stared at it for a long time.
I didn't owe him a response. I didn't owe him anything. But something, not warmth, exactly, more like curiosity, or perhaps just the desire for a clean ending, made me reply. His voice, when he called, was unrecognizable from the man I had last spoken to. No arrogance. No performance. Just fatigue, the particular exhaustion of someone who has had a very thorough education in consequences. "I'm probably the last person you want to hear from," he began. "That's true," I said. A long pause. "I was wrong," he said. Quietly. Simply. "I didn't understand what you built or how much you put into it. I thought technology was just infrastructure.
A tool."
That loyalty was optional. "It was never optional," I replied. "It was never anything other than essential." "I've lost everything," he said. "My father won't take my calls. That's between you and him. It's not my business." "I know. I just needed to say this." "Then say it." He exhaled. "I'm sorry, Lisa.
For underestimating you.
For not reading the contract. For calling you useless when you were the only person in that building holding everything together. You didn't deserve any of it." I let the silence sit. Let it breathe. Then, accepted. But don't confuse that with forgiveness. He nodded. I could somehow hear it in the pause, and the call ended. I sat in the quiet of my home office for a while after that. Not because of what he said, but because of what it reminded me. How far I had come. 3 weeks later, I stood in front of a building with my name on the door. Carter Systems. No marble lobbies. No ceremonial excess. Just clean desks, fast computers, natural light, and a team of engineers, some from my old Hamilton team, some fresh graduates with the bright, eager energy of people who have not yet been told what they can't do. I gave a short speech at the ribbon cutting. I built my career in the shadows, I told them. For most of my professional life, I was called an employee, not a leader, not a creator, not a partner. I was underestimated, underpaid, and overlooked. But I kept building, because I believed in the work, even when no one believed in me. I looked around the room, at the faces turned toward me. Here's what I've learned. Your value is not determined by who sees you. It's determined by what you create, how you act under pressure, and how you carry yourself when no one is watching. The applause was quiet.
Sincere.
The best kind. Now I spend part of my time mentoring young tech professionals, not just how to write code, but how to read a contract, how to negotiate, how to say no when no is the correct answer, how to demand respect without apology. Richard retired quietly. Diana became the new CEO of Hamilton Tech. She called me during the transition. "What's the most important thing you learned from all of this?" she asked. I thought about it for a moment. "Take care of your people," I said. "And they will take care of everything else." It's a simple lesson. Most people never learn it. But for the ones who do, it changes everything. As for Jason, the last I heard, he lives in a one-room apartment on the edge of town. No one calls him Mr. Hamilton anymore. His name barely surfaces in the industry. And mine? Mine is on contracts, on systems, on security protocols running in buildings across the city, on the front door of the company I built from nothing. Lisa Carter. Not a useless employee, not a forgotten name, not someone to be dismissed with 7 words and a smirk. A creator, a fighter, a woman who rewrote the last chapter of her own story and made sure it was a good one. You know what the story really is underneath everything? It's a story about what happens when you invest in the wrong thing and the right thing walks out the door. Jason thought he was firing an employee. He was actually firing the foundation. He thought he was cutting dead weight. He was actually severing the only thing holding the building up. And Lisa? Lisa didn't destroy anything. She didn't need to. She just stopped protecting someone who had decided she wasn't worth protecting. There is a version of this story where she begged, where she accepted the injustice quietly, where she disappeared like he expected her to. That's not the version she chose. The lesson isn't complicated. It doesn't require a law degree or a genius-level contract clause. It's simply this: know your worth.
Document it.
Protect it. And when someone tells you that you're useless, make sure the next thing they hear is the sound of everything they took for granted going dark. If this story gave you that rush of yes, finally, that bone-deep satisfaction of watching karma do its job, then smash that like button because it genuinely helps more than you know. Subscribe for more stories like this: corporate revenge, underdogs winning, and the deeply satisfying collapse of unearned arrogance. And I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated at work? What happened? Tell me everything. And if you're ready for another one, the next video is right there, waiting for you. Don't keep karma waiting.